Today we have the man, the myth, and the legend. Did I embarrass you with that?
Just a little bit.
Yes. Manny Lopez is our guest today. Hello, everyone. I'm Randall Carlisle, your host of Odyssey House Journals. Our co-host, Nicole Slack, is not here today. She will be next week. And I say the man, the myth, the legend, because you on social media and everything else, you appear everywhere.
I do my best.
And the other thing is we had your wife on our previous podcast.
Lucky you.
And I know she's a good-looking woman, and she's very inspirational.
I think I'll keep her.
Yeah, well, I think you should. And she was talking a lot about you very favorably in your current edition of your life, not your past life.
Oh, that was a crazy part.
So, and she said you do inspirational recovery rap.
I do.
Which most people who have an image of rappers see people talking about drugs and using bad language and committing crimes and everything else. How in the heck do you come up with recovery rap?
I think growing up, I would rap with friends or in the streets. Or I just really always connected with hip hop and rap music. And it was a different kind of connection that I had with anything else because it was like an emotional connection. The thing about it was that the topics that they were talking about were, drug use, degrading women, criminal activity, things like that. And I really believe that words are powerful and it's kind of like a spell. And so what I listen to, my confirmation bias, which is like what my thoughts are, my mind starts searching for evidence that it's true. And so when I'm repeating those words, I became a gang member. I became super toxic in my relationships. I became abusive. I became a thief and a liar and a cheater. But I wasn't willing to get rid of that connection that I had with music because it was just so near and dear to me that, when I transitioned into recovery, I rapped about my life. And my life had changed. And recovery gave me so many topics to talk about that, I think that there's unlimited information that I can rap about.
That's true.
And I graduated from Odyssey House, and there's so many maxims that I try to live by, like act as if, become as if, there's no free lunch, and things like that. And I can add those into my life, and then I rap about my life. I rap about things like I believe in myself, and so when I'm doing shows at some of these events, the crowd is rapping and they're chanting some of these songs with me. So I'm like, I believe in myself. I believe in myself. And I got the crowd going back and forth. Now that's a message that I want to help to spread, is for people to believe in themselves. And for, there's nothing that I can complain about now because I'm in recovery. And
I don't mean to put you on the spot. Without music or beat or anything, can you give us an example?
Well, yeah, I would rap about things like, I can't complain. I'm getting money, but not in those ways. Recovery fits like a glove, I don't play. I've been in the gym taking shots, I got range. Not chasing fame, helping people make change.
Now, how do you write this?
I write this.
And then you memorize it, right?
Yes.
I think that'd be hard to do, but I guess it comes naturally to you.
Well, it's something that I've always connected with since I was a kid. I remember the hip hop stations here in our state. When I was in foster homes throughout my youth, sometimes I was alone. I didn't have anything but my little AM FM clock radio.
Yeah.
And so that's what I connected with.
That was your friend.
Yeah.
So we had you on a podcast several years ago.
Yeah, it's been a few. Yeah.
And one reason that you wanted to come back, and I wanted you to come back, is you made I think a promise during that podcast. What was it?
That I would. You asked me what the future was for me, what my goals for the future were, and that was to start a program.
And you've done it now.
I have.
And you were in treatment at the time that I interviewed you, right?
I think I was either on the back end of my outpatient, or I had just recently graduated.
Okay, so tell us what your wife told us about it in our last podcast, but for those who didn't see that podcast, tell us what you've done.
So we created Level Up IOP. We partnered with a good friend of ours, Portia Louder, and the whole clinical team at Utah Family Therapy. So what we are is we're a virtual online intensive outpatient program. So we literally bring the program to the people. So if somebody is dealing with social anxiety, if they have kids, a job, experience in homelessness, they live in a rural area, we want to bridge the gap so that anybody and everybody can get treatment.
So they do it. So it's an online IOP program, which leads me to question, I mean, do you, I think in every IOP program, you have to do UAs, drug testing.
Yes.
How do you do that?
So we contract our UAs out to a company called LabCorp, and there's LabCorps all over the place in different cities across the state. And so we randomize our drug tests, and so when they get called in for their UAs, it's their responsibility to get themselves there and get the UA in. If they don't, then it's considered a dirty UA, and that'll get reported to, like if they have a probation officer, that'll get reported to.
So does your program work pretty much the way in-house IOPs work? I mean, like if somebody screws up several times on a UA, then they're out of the program, that kind of stuff? Then
we refer them to a higher level of care. And we have a couple people that we refer to, but mainly we refer to Odyssey House. It's a program that I went through, and I can literally say like Odyssey House saved my life. And so that's what we do is we refer to them and with the hopes that it'll do the same thing for them.
I couldn't make it. I think I was sick. You spoke at a graduation gala for Odyssey House, and everything I've heard is that it was a tremendous speech.
Thank you.
What were you nervous about doing that?
I was a little bit nervous. I think I had been out of Odyssey for a couple of years, and so I always felt like I would get that call to speak for Odyssey, especially with the things that I was doing in the community. I didn't think it would come as soon as it did, but it did, and I was nervous until I got on that stage, and I was around like amazing people, like all the program managers and everybody that I'd looked up to from the day that I walked into Odyssey House.
Sure. What, for those who did not hear your podcast years ago, describe a little of your life, how you got involved with drugs and crime and everything else.
Okay. Well, my mom got pregnant with me when she was 13 years old. So I was born into a lot of dysfunction. My mom wasn't capable of being a mother at that time. My grandmother kind of stepped in to help with that. My mother was in a lot of, she sought out like men that weren't very healthy for her. And so by the time that she was 21, 22, there was 5 of us. And
from different fathers?
My brothers and sisters, they all have the same father. I'm the only one with a different father. So I've never met my father. As soon as I was born, my grandmother packed us up and moved us away from where we were at. And so it was shortly after my mom had all 5 of us that the father of my brothers and sisters decided that he was going to go start a family with somebody else, which left my mom with 5 kids trying to figure it out. And, there wasn't a lot of hope for that happening. And I remember I was leaving elementary school when I was 9 years old, and some people walked up to me, and they were from the Division of Child and Family Services. And they said that we were going with them, and that would begin my journey through the foster care system. Now, initially, one family took all 5 of us, which was pretty rare.
Yeah, it is.
And, I was a kid with a lot of act-out behaviors, and so I immediately started acting out. I recognized that we were being taken from my mom, who I loved very much, and So I started saying things like, you're not my mom, you're not my dad. I started like riling my brothers and sisters up. And after about 9 months to a year, the family said, hey, we have to separate him from the other kids.
Ooh.
And so that would begin my journey being bounced around from foster home to foster home. That would continue to happen until I was around 12 years old. And I ended up in a foster home where there was, some physical abuse, some emotional abuse. And I said, enough was enough. I'm done being bounced around. When you're a foster child, the families that you're with, and even when you're at school and different things, they have a way of letting you know you're a foster kid, just by the way they treat you and things like that, which says like you're different or you're not good enough. And, and a lot of my negative core beliefs, I'm sure, came from those situations. So I decided I was going to run away. And
At 12?
At 12 years old. And I was in a foster home in Lehigh, in Lehigh, Utah, and I stole a bike from school, and I rode that bike on Redwood Road all the way back to Salt Lake.
How many miles, just for people who aren't aware of Utah geography, how many miles would that be?
I'd say it's probably 40, 50 miles, maybe, close to something like that. I could have that wrong.
I don't know.
Maybe
But it's a long, especially for a 12-year-old on a stolen bike.
Yeah.
So
I've always been good with numbers and directions, and I remembered my grandmother's phone number, and I called, and my uncle answered, and I asked her where my mom was, and she was actually there at the time, and they came and they picked me up, and this would begin my life on the run as a juvenile. I'd get picked up, go to juvenile detention center, go to a placement run, get picked up, go to juvenile detention center, go to a placement run, get picked up, go to a more secure facility because of the running. And that was my cycle until I was around 16 years old. Now, during that whole process, I started smoking marijuana. I started drinking alcohol. And then when I was 14, when I was 12 years old, I tried meth for the first time. And it was something that I didn't like, but then I tried it again at 14. And it was something that I loved. And that would begin my pattern. Like I said, I was on the run and I didn't have a place to live a lot of the times. But I knew that if I had a bag of meth, somebody would let me in their house. I'd have somewhere to go. And
because they wanted the meth.
Because they wanted the meth. And so I began to hustle so that I would be able to provide a place for me to stay so that I was safe, or what I viewed as safe. When I was 16 years old, I was involved in a drug deal that didn't go the way that it was planned, and I had to shoot my way out of. I didn't have to shoot. I chose to shoot my way out of a house, and in the process, somebody was shot twice, and I was picked up about a month later, certified as an adult at age 16, sent out to the prison at age 17, and I wouldn't get out of prison until I was 23 years old. So 6-7 years later is when I got out of prison for the first time.
So you went to the Maine State Prison.
Yes.
At 17.
I did.
What was that like?
It was scary. For me, I'm from Salt Lake. And so, I was a part of a Salt Lake gang before I went to prison, and I gravitated to them. One thing about prison is, you go in there and you pick a side.
And you have to.
And you have to.
For what? Safety?
For safety. For another thing is for connection. Like even throughout my whole childhood and throughout my whole addiction, like one thing I was searching for, and I think we all search for, is connection.
Mm-hmm.
And so I felt I would find connection there, and that's what I did. And I did a lot of things that I was not comfortable doing, that I'm not proud of doing. And but that would be my pattern for the next 20 years. I would get out, go in, get out, go in. And I'd get out, be in a toxic relationship, go back to what I knew, which was selling drugs, using drugs, being in a toxic relationship. I mean, the example of the relationships that my mom was in was not a very good one for me.
No.
And I think I picked up a lot of those things just from being around her and other family members that were in similar relationships. And so, one thing that I kind of thought love was abuse. like if you don't abuse me, you don't love me. Or if you don't allow me to abuse you, then you don't. Then that's me saying I don't love you.
You really perceived it that way.
I kind of did, yeah, on some level. And I can look back and see that in my toxic relationships, like that's what was going on.
Jeez.
We would fight. We would run away from each other. We'd chase each other and come back together and fight some more.
We love each other.
Yeah.
Well,
Can't you tell I love you?
wow. I'm glad I met you now.
Yeah, me
You'd
too.
say, Randall, I like you. Bam. Be like, hey, thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Now
so-
we see each other and it tugs and
Yeah, I know.
Congratulations.
Now I'm scared. Jeez. So how did you finally break out of it? I mean, that's a terrible way to grow up.
Yeah.
It really is.
So, the probably the biggest barrier for me was getting away from toxic relationships. So when I would say in 2018, my daughter was born. Her name's Serenity True. She's the most amazing, beautiful, inspiring, hard-headed little knucklehead I've ever met.
So she's sort of like you.
Yeah, something like that.
Yes.
And when I held her for the first time, I knew that was true connection. That was what family is. And I was going to do anything and everything to give her something better than I was given. However, I was still using at that time. So I went back to prison and I asked the gang to leave. I didn't want to be a part of the gang anymore. I wanted to be a family man. Now, usually that's something that they'll do. They'll say like, yeah, well, they kind of give you our blessing to go be a family man or to go be a man of God or something like that. And but when I asked, they said no, that I needed to get with the program. And it was on the main yard when this conversation was taking place. And so I made the decision, you know what, like I'm just going to force your hand. And so I punched one of them and I made him jump me out on the main yard. And they stoned me pretty bad. Like I remember getting up and my face was all lumped up and I didn't know exactly where I was. But I'd never felt freer in my life, like spiritually, like I didn't have this, this baggage like that. They'd been weighing me down.
And you knew that you were going to get beaten up by
that.
doing what you did.
I did. I knew that, but I knew that like for me, that was something that needed to happen because a lot of people that get out of gangs, especially in prison, what they do is they tell the cops they can't live somewhere because they don't want to be a part of the gang. And then they get moved to another part of the prison. And then later on, when they're around people in the gang, they end up coming back to the gang. And it's like an in and out thing. However, like I didn't want to do that. If I'm going to say I'm done, I'm done. And I want to be a father. Now, the sucky part of all this is that, I'd taken this part of my life away and I thought everything was going to miraculously get better. However, it didn't. It got worse because, I'd used the gang as a crutch and as a form of support to lean on when I was going through difficult times. And I didn't have that anymore. But I still had the addiction. I still had the codependency. I still had my destructive thinking. I still had my negative core beliefs. And so I still went back to doing a lot of the same things that I was doing before. And so I pretty much abandoned my daughter with her grandmother. I would show up from time to time with arms full of gifts. And then feel so guilty from being such a terrible father that I couldn't stay more than an hour. And I'd run back into the streets and toxic relationships and into the depths of my, self-hate.
So how'd that all end?
So it ended by, I was in a stolen vehicle in Murray here in Utah, driving on the wrong side of the road. I was in a relationship with my wife at the time, and we had been fighting and separated. This is one of those times where we ran away from each other to find each other. And I couldn't get my hands on any meth, any heroin, any bath salts, but there was a liquor store right there. So I was going to settle for a bottle of Jack Daniels. And I go through the intersection and I crash into another vehicle, into a van. Somebody pulled over to help. I jumped out of the vehicle that I was in, brushed them aside and jumped in their vehicle, and I tried to steal their vehicle.
Oh, jeez.
I created this whole big unnecessary situation, this dangerous situation, and then I passed out in their vehicle. And I woke up in the hospital, and then I passed out again. And I woke up in the backseat of my parole officer's vehicle being driven back to prison for the 11th time. And this
The
is
11th time?
for the 11th time. I mean, this was my pattern. And, but for the first time in my life, I feel like my higher power, who I choose to call God, intervened and, you know, gave me like the biggest spiritual backhand anybody could ever give me, and said, like, this is on you.
Wake up, buddy.
Yeah.
It's time.
Because I, in that moment, I was like, I did this to myself. And that was a hard thing for me to ever admit, because I feel like I had such a hard life that, you know, the world owed me something for everything that I'd been through. And I really came to the realization in the backseat of my parole officer's vehicle that I had done this. I couldn't blame the foster care system. I couldn't blame my mom for not being a mom or being on drugs. I couldn't blame my father for not being there. I couldn't blame the judicial system. I couldn't blame the parole officers or the toxic relationships that I'd been in. I had literally done this to myself. And not only had I just done this to myself, but at this point, now I'm doing it to other people. I'm hurting other people. And the person that I wanted to hurt the least was my daughter. Now I'm being taken away from her. And she's 3 years old at the time. And I call her on the phone in the prison, and, you know, she's asking me where I'm at, because she's starting to talk at this time. And, you know, it really dawned on me in that moment how, like, I'm supposed to set a better example for her, because I play a part in the type of men that she is going to allow in her lives. And from there, you know, I said, you know what? I'm not going to pay attention to the amount of time that I'm facing, which was a lot. I'm going to start working on myself. And that's what I did. I got into a drug program in the prison, and I did really well there. The cool thing about this is when I was doing that, my wife got into treatment as well at the House of Hope program. And she started working on herself. And I was in there by myself, and I felt, you know, alone and abandoned. But I chose to challenge those things and just continue to focus on what I had control over, which was my recovery. And so that's what I did. And when I went in front of the judge, finally, I presented myself as a changed man, and the judge looked at me like real intent for probably 10, 15 seconds, which felt like 20 minutes.
Buying this.
No, he really believed in me. This was somebody that I least expected to have any faith in anything that I was presenting to him, because I was used to nobody believing in me. And he told me, like, you know, the majority of your life, all you've done is time, and time hasn't served you well. So I'm going to give you an opportunity to go do a residential treatment program. And if you don't do as well there as you did here, then I'm going to give you every single day of your sentence. And so I went to Odyssey House and had a really good conversation with my wife. And she went to House of Hope, and she had these really cool things that I wasn't familiar with called boundaries. And she set these things with me.
Boundary. What a novel approach.
Yeah. And she said, you're going to run an honest program. If she's like, you know, we have our kids. She's like, I have our kids now, and they're not going to see abuse, and they're not going to see us fight. And they're, you know, if that's what we're going to be, if we're together, then we're not going to be together. And it's something I wanted more than anything in this world. And so I ran an honest program. It wasn't easy for me, and I got busted back a couple times.
I'll bet.
At Odyssey. But I promise you, I learned from every single time I was held accountable. And Odyssey was difficult for me because I'm from this city. So people coming in and out of the program, I know a lot of them. And so holding people accountable was difficult, because I felt like I was alienated from everybody. And people would call me a rat and a snitch and things like that. And I'm like, I'm just trying to save my life. I'm just trying to be a father. I'm just trying to be a good man to my wife. I just want my life back. And so I'd walk down the hall sometimes, and people would be like, there's Manny.
There's Manny. Watch out.
And I really challenged my ego, but which was good for me, because I needed to learn that my ego was not my amigo. And I needed to humble myself. And so I completed residential. And then after that, me and my wife moved in together. I became a peer support specialist after working construction cleanup. She was a server at Buffalo Wild Wings, but we knew that we wanted to work in recovery. And I really wanted to work at Odyssey. However, I was on parole and things like that. So there was just some conflictions, and it didn't work out that way for me. But I started working at Papillon Integrated Recovery Center as a house manager. And from there, we got back into school, working on our degrees in human services with the concentration in addiction. And we were able to get on the clinical team there and just, you know, being on podcasts and being at recovery events and speaking and rapping and all these things has just brought a lot of things into my life. Like I can definitely see that, like, that's the hand of my higher power, who I choose to call God, like intervening and saying, like, stick with what you're doing because this is the path that you're supposed to be on. And I'm able to connect with people all over the place, especially, you know, I never thought that the virtual online thing would be what I do, because I've been teaching for the last few years in-person groups, and I was really nervous to start the virtual groups.
I can understand that.
However, I've been able to connect really well, and we have people from all over the state, northern Utah, southern Utah, from, you know, different cities all over, and people are opening up about things, and I feel like, you know, my lived experience has plays a part in that, because we can connect. I feel like I've lived such a crazy life in so many areas that I can relate with so many people. It doesn't matter what economical class you come from, or, you know, what kind of trauma you've experienced. Like there's something there that we can connect with. And the opposite of addiction, they say, is connection. But not just connection to anything, but connection to community.
And I was just thinking, you know, there's so many. Your Level Up IOP makes a lot of sense because there's so many areas outside of the metropolitan areas in Utah where there is there are no programs for anyone.
Like Price, Utah, there's people that don't have transportation. There's not a lot of resources. And so, like, we want to bridge that gap and help
That's cool.
everybody get treatment. Like, we recover better together, and it takes all of us just for one of us to make it out of this.
I love your wife. Okay, I'm not going to try to steal her from you, but the story you told me makes it sound like her setting the boundaries that she did when she was in House of Hope to you getting out and coming into a treatment program is pretty important in your recovery.
Very, very well. And in treatment, they tell you, like, don't date for a year.
Right.
And, you know, and I see it in the programs that I work for as well, is people, they come into the program and then they have this toxic relationship that they're leaving and they want to stay connected with that. So what happens is they're not focusing on themselves.
Right.
They're focusing more on that. And a lot of the times it's like, we've kind of already lost them. You know, it's only a matter of time before they're running back to that toxicity.
Well, sure. My first time, I was trying to please all these other people, and I thought, okay, they'll be happy that I'm getting treatment, as opposed to I need treatment.
Well, one thing that I really got from Jerome, who worked for Odyssey when I went through Odyssey, was that, like, if I'm always saying yes to everybody else, I'm the person that I'm saying no to. And I got tired of saying no to myself. Like, I deserve more, and then the people that I care about and that I work with, they deserve more too. I can't, you know, have something going on in my life that causes me to be 70% effective and then deal with something at work, and then now that brings me down to 20% effective. Sure. And then when I go home, that's what my family's getting. That's what my wife and my kids are getting, is 20% of what I can give them. That's not okay with me. I need to show up for the people that show up for me. And
you are an amazing person. Maybe a couple of years from now, when you've accomplished even greater things, you can come back and do another podcast.
Absolutely.
And I might remind people, if you just tuned into this one, that if you check out the podcast before this one, we had Manny's wife, Misty, on.
You want to hear a cool story? Go check out that one.
That's a good promo.
Yeah.
Hey, thank you very much for coming back, and all your success and all you're doing for the recovery community. You're an inspiration.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Thank you. And thank you for watching or listening to another edition of Odyssey House Journals.